Whew. Sounds like the wind's really picking up out there. I'm glad you've got a nice cozy place to spend the bad weather, right here with me, around the fire, listening to something a little different today. I've thought about it, and I've decided that the other writers that write for this channel may not be getting enough presence here. So, on today's episode of Cozy Horror, we're looking at some other great writers. Some great writers who have been seen on this show before, and I hope will be seen again. So, welcome to today's guest narration, Cozy Horror, with me, Dr. Plague. Let's get started with a fan favorite by a writer named Barona, and a time that I remember very well. So let's go all the way back to 1998. I was around 8 years old when I realized, as did my family, that I had a unique memory. Photographic, they called it. It's really nothing like a photograph, though. I always assumed everyone could recall their first day of preschool, the names of the kids they met only once at the arcade. But at 11 years old, my sister Cammy was chosen for a game show on the radio. Without hesitation, she chose me as a roommate to bring with. She could have chosen either of our parents, even our older brother Charlie, who was in college. She could have picked one of her friends, 8th graders like her. But she chose me. I remember sitting around the kitchen table, eating dinner, the pitch-black Midwestern winter night just outside the giant kitchen window behind my dad. He and my mom were totally supportive of the idea. He had offered even to drive us to the radio station. "I would have chosen you too, Bobby," my mom said, laughing. "You remember every weird fact ever." And it was true. I could close my eyes and see every house my parents had ever brought us to. I could draw the floor plan of them if I wanted to. My siblings would ask me to retell stories or movie plots on long car rides. But it wasn't until the radio show, and my sister choosing me as her person, that I knew I had something special. I can still remember going to bed that night after dinner, feeling excited. I finally fell asleep, pressed up against the wall that divided me from my sister's room, her voice through the vents above my bed, saying good night like she did every night. The smell of dust on the furnace, the sound of old creaking boards directly above me in the attic. It was the last night I was happy to have my amazing memory. To this day, I wish I could forget what happened next. I wish I could tell you we won the game show. I wish I could tell you with incredible detail what it was like at the studio. Maybe then, when I closed my eyes, that's what I would see. Not the black, whipping night blurring past me as I ran. I would feel the rush of anticipation and my sister's hand squeezing mine, instead of cold, wet gravel scraping my cheeks and palms when I tried to crawl away on 2 sprained ankles. I would hear the producers cue the canned audience laughter, not the frantic, desperate flapping of leather wings as they neared. Maybe I would have won a t-shirt that still sits in my dresser. Maybe my sister would have won the $1,000 prize. Maybe I would sleep with my door unlocked. I'll never know. What I do know, without a shadow of a doubt, is that I would not have survived any of this if my family hadn't believed me. To this day, it's the thing I am most grateful for in the entire world. It was the day after dinner, on Tuesday, February 17th. School had been agonizingly slow, as I knew it would be all week waiting for Friday. It was all we could talk about on the way home. For years, I'd waited for school with Yuki and my best friend Dominic, who lived on the street perpendicular to mine. The creek crossed under Sistrine Drive and wound its way along Dominic's backyard. There are hundreds of childhood memories in my head, of he and I and our siblings jumping over the creek, building bridges from his yard over the creek to the field behind the rec center, sliding on the ice in the winter, or half-assed fishing and turtle catching in the summer. I always envied my friends who could walk right from their backyard and into the little winding creek. It was cold, but it hadn't snowed in a few weeks. There were still some small patches of ice on the sidewalk, but most of it had melted, along with the slurry gray mounds of stale snow along the curbs and in small scattered patches on the grass. There was massive construction happening on the other side of the creek. They were building a stupid business center on the field we used to play kickball in, the crane visible between two houses behind us. Snow was due that weekend, and everything would be coated and beautiful again. The downside of a blanket of snow was the eerie quiet it caused, and how hard it was to sleep at night when the moonlight and the snow were so bright, even with your closed eyes. It was nearly 6 p.m., and the mid-February sky was already darkening. We had stopped under the flickering gold streetlight at the corner of Citrine and Amethyst, the street that I lived on. I remember huddling close in a group, talking. I remember the wind picking up and the edge of the sky glowing purple behind the house along Citrine. This was when my oldest brother, on break for one more week, drove up to the corner in Mom's old sedan. "Hey, Bobby," he called, giving my friends a little wave that they all returned. He was returning some jeans to the mall and wanted me to come with him. It was rare that Charlie asked me to do anything. I think about that a lot. Had he paid more attention to me before that night, would I have gotten in the car? Would things have been different? I think about all the choices I made that led to that happening, but none as much as the decision to get in the car with my older brother instead of walking home that evening. Maybe I wouldn't sleep in my closet. Maybe I'd have a family of my own. I'll never know. Then again, maybe I would have never seen Charlie again. If you asked, I could tell you every moment on that trip to the mall. The conversation we had, mainly Charlie asking if things fit him or were flattering. Charlie had come out to our parents a few months ago. They were not surprised or fazed. He had told me that night that he had gone to the bar and felt underdressed, and now he felt pressured to be fashionable. The last thing Charlie said to me before we got in the damn car was, "It's funny, even if you're different, there's still pressure to be the same." At 8:53 p.m. on Tuesday, February 17th, 1998, Charlie and I were on the front seat of our mother's 1995 maroon Lamino. We were at the final stop sign on the ride home, and it was 38 degrees outside. Pearl Jam's Tin was in the CD player, and we were at the corner of Pondside and Citrine, about to turn left into our neighborhood, and to home, to be with our family. Our mother had lasagna waiting for us. We were third in line at the three-way stop sign. On Charlie's side of the street was Yuki's house, with pretty lanterns lining the paved path to the courtyard of their U-shaped ranch home. On my side, past my window, was the pond. The path that led around the pond and up the hill was bright at the edge from the streetlights, but quickly faded to black, with only the occasional twinkle of a back porch light in the distance. The remains of the moon tower, built in the 70s, were barely discernible against the sky, only via the absence of stars and the shape of the structures that was only recognizable to those of us who grew up there. It was a scene that had made me feel small and afraid countless times. The cold radiating from the windows made me feel even more anxious, though now I realized that it was the adrenaline, an ancient alarm system going off in my bloodstream, survival mode manifesting in goosebumps, and what I mistook for heebie-jeebies. The black of the moon tower against the blue-black of the sky shifted as my eyes started to adjust. I had thought about a sleepover game Dominic and I had played when we were in 3rd grade, staring at each other's faces in the dark until they morphed and changed and threw us into giggle fits. It wasn't until the bottom left star above the hill disappeared that I realized it wasn't my eyes playing tricks on me. It wasn't until the pitch grew larger that I opened my mouth to say something. Charlie was deep in the chorus of Even Flow and never heard it coming. It was a low whistle, like an old man out for a walk. 2 notes, one high, one low. It repeated again, louder, and I'd turned to tell Charlie when I saw the red light of the brake lights on the car in front of us fade from his face, and he finally saw what was coming. Only, it hadn't come from the pitch black over the pond. It came from the other side, slamming into the driver's side of the car in front of us. It shattered the glass into a hailstorm, crashing onto our windshield. The impact was so intense that both left wheels had lifted off the ground. Charlie initially cursed loudly and went to open the door to help. I'd screamed at him not to, but I barely got a word out before a penetrating silent vacuum filled the air around me, sucking the air out of my lungs. Seconds later, my windows were shattered over me, glass sticking in my cheeks and the wind whipping the blood across my face and into my mouth as I screamed. I knew before I opened my eyes that it wasn't just an accident, that there was no car or bike or even human assailant. I knew before I pried my eyes open that everything I had feared as a child, that all the myths and legends and ghost stories, were real. I knew it wasn't a bat or a bird. I knew as I felt frantic claws at the nylon remains of my seatbelt that it was a monster. Not a cute storybook monster, but an ancient, angry, bitter creature. One that had been there long before I had, or the town had, or even people had. The last thing I saw before I felt the hook sink into my shoulder and I was lifted into the black swirling cold was Charlie, slumped over the steering column, Eddie Vinder's voice still calling out to me, until I couldn't hear him anymore. Not for 1 second did I think it was a dream. The cold made sure of that. My legs heavily dragged across the broken glass of the car window, ripping my jeans and slamming my legs into the frame. I knew it was real. The biting night sky whipped around me as I violently sank a few feet as the hooks in my shoulder began to slip. I experienced a new level of pain as I felt jagged talons piercing my side, and I folded forward as I was yanked backwards into the pitch. I felt another agonizing piercing on the side of my torso before being yanked up away from the earth and everything I'd ever known. I was pulled into the pitch past the streetlights, but whatever had me was struggling. I fell 20 feet onto the icy hard gravel path, but wasn't freed. Violent metallic screams flooded my ears, and the bones of my forehead and chin were scraped along the gravel path. I desperately clawed at the earth, trying to find anything to grip, but only found fistfuls of gravel and goose crap. The talons in my side ripped out suddenly, and I felt a sickening oozing from my sides. I tried to roll over to my knees, but the pain on each side was horrible, and I felt bile swelling in my throat. A patch of dirty snow was inches away, and I tried to crawl towards it to get some ice on my bleeding injuries. That was when I felt leathery whips on my face and violent snags in my hair, pulling and snapping. My stomach lurched as again I was yanked up into the night, higher into my own icy black death. I tried desperately to grasp onto whatever had me, terrified to fall as we climbed higher. The cold stung my raw shoulders and hips, and I felt my blood freezing. The deep scrapes on my knees and face burned with the wind, feeling like icy razors scraping my cheekbones. My numb fingers found a thick, velvety limb. Coarse hair bristled and slipping under my blood. 6 daggers dug into my skull and neck. Even over the roar of the wind and the pounding of the wings, I could hear a horrible scraping and squealing of claws on my skull from behind. From the inside. I struggled to breathe, blood and vomit filling my mouth and tears threatening to suffocate me. Suddenly, the little air that I had on my lungs was forced out violently as my midsection was slammed into the highest beam of the moon tower. The crunching of my ribs was unmistakable. My vision and even my own thoughts darkened with what I can only describe as wetness. Later, I would be told that my ribs were so violently broken that they had pierced my lungs. For a moment, the moon illuminated my nightmares. I was nauseatingly high up, one eye swollen shut, but I could see the frozen pond, dull and distant. Closer, I could see a row of houses, their windows glowing but cruelly out of each. One house still had its Christmas lights up, complete with a giant light-up plastic mold Santa Claus tied to their chimney. It felt wrong and cruel, a warm and happy impossibility. I looked down to see a stream of my blood pouring from my body in a steady flow, then broken by an aggressive gust of icy wind. I choked on a scream, and I was grabbed again, talons stretching out of the exit wound in my shoulder, birthing brand new ones on my lower back. I couldn't hear my own screams over the wind and the angry metallic shrieks like barbed wire on a rusted trampoline. I remember at this point, I could see the pond shrinking south of me as once again my host struggled with its prey. Suddenly we dropped right above the creek, my legs slamming into the fence surrounding the construction site. The cranes loomed over us, the two security floodlights at its base finally providing light. The construction site was deep in the ground, a parking garage with a basement level built to be tornado-proof. I've heard countless times from other people with violent experiences that they forget chunks of their trauma or they blacked it out. I try not to seethe with jealousy. If I could forget any of it, I would want to forget what I saw under those garish white construction lights. I can remember every tiny, ice-cold pebble digging into my skin, the shimmering bouquet of my tear-soaked lashes, the gritty, jagged pain of my pulverized rib bones. I remember the smell, a mix of cold sweat, like when our dad would come home after his jog, diesel, blood. There was another smell coming from the base of the crane, sickly sweet, like almond extract gone bad. Behind the crane was a trailer. The paneling was beige and a huge green tin sign that read, Argon Construction. I thought for a moment that a phone might be inside. I pulled myself up onto my knees and looked around. It was difficult since my left eye was useless, and my right one was full of tears and blood. My assailant was nowhere in sight. I thought that maybe it had gotten injured or caught on a fence. Stupid. I know now that it simply was rousing its companions, because it was dinner time. I was an offering, like when my cat Nala would bring me dead robins. Here I was, with my wings clipped. I was halfway to the trailer, limping as fast as I could, every step excruciating, breathing like there were pins and needles in me. Even with my sobbing hyperventilation, I heard it. I hear it now. I can always hear it. The two-toned whistle, haunting and dreadful, like even if I hadn't been at death's door, that tone would still have shaken me. Like a doomsday alarm, like useless sirens wailing as meteors crash into the boiling sea. Under the whistle, a thick, wet breath, echoing from beneath the base of the crane, a dark recess in the cold, wet ground, with darkness somehow leaking from it. Darkness so black that only a staccatoed stream was visible. Something was breathing. I wish I could tell you that the construction unearthed something ethereal, a beautiful sleeping giant, an angel, a groundbreaking discovery. But I don't even think it was the construction. I just think she had always been there. Maybe for years she had survived on squirrels or deer. Maybe she thawed during the warm winter. Maybe she was left behind. The first thing I saw was the tattered, jagged tips of wings. Bat-like, narrow, dark-veined like bruised plum skin, her pulse visibly pumping through the veins that raised and ripped through the paper-thin skin, stretching over her wings so tightly it seemed painful just to exist, like she wasn't finished yet, like she'd been birthed from the earth prematurely, and she was angry. Her hair was matted in clumps, but where it was free, it was long enough to drag along the ground, slimy and cold and full of dirt, leaves and dirty snow. Her scalp was suffering. I could see her follicles piercing her scalp, like deceased plant roots, bulbous and swollen. Open sores at her hairline showed what I can only stomach to explain as insect activity. Layers of sick, sheer skin being actively eaten away by a miasma, forehead wrinkles deep and scarred in places. She had no eyebrows or lashes that I could see from my crouched hiding position. Her nose was just a cavity, like a Halloween skull, also swarming with parasites. When she breathed in, a flap rippled across her face, the wetness dripping over her mouth. Her mouth! Years later, an art teacher had told me that while he enjoyed my monstrous horror drawings, that even special effects departments had boundaries, and I would be unlikely to get hired if I didn't tone it down or attempt to make them more realistic. If only he had known I was following his rules, drawing what I knew. She had the familiar sagging of a toothless old woman with flat, cracked, corpse-like lips. But then she parted them. The rot was dizzying. Her gums had been clawed away, scabs and scars and thick bands of roped grayish mauve flesh. Her top and bottom jawbones were not simply bared. They were jagged, layered razors, filed, but not with anything modern or sharp or particularly clean. Time, madness, desperation had filed and shaped that nightmare maw. Makeshift teeth of rocks had been maniacally shoved under the skin, adhered with infection and growth. The entire left side of her face was worn through layer by layer. Her tongue slipped in and out of what could have been her throat, sharp, gaunt collarbones literally piercing through that tissue-like skin, dark, rancid blood pooling in the deep recesses of her collar. She had one misshapen breast. The left side of her chest was deeply scarred and textured, as though it had been burned. Her fingers were bones with jagged talons blackened at the tips. Thick scar tissue marred her shoulders, where her wings took her from somewhat humanoid to monstrous. Scars. Scars everywhere. Rotting wounds dripping larvae and blood onto the frozen ground. I wish I could forget the momentary warmth I felt as urine poured down my legs, immediately freezing and burning, sticking my jeans to my raised and bloody shins. I tore myself away from staring at her long enough to escape. She had chosen her feeding place well. The deep recess of the site was the length of a football field, since that's what the field had once been. High walls of frozen earth surrounded us on three sides. Climbing up in my condition would be impossible. There was a ramp at the far entrance, but I wouldn't have made it past her. Only behind me was the fence I had slammed into on the way in, the creek only a few yards from that, and then a row of backyards of houses that included Dominic's. I had cried then. I cried thinking that only a few minutes away, my best friend was probably getting ready for bed. Then he would always remember the night before he woke up to find out his best friend was dead. He had no idea that my blood was spilling all over the place that we had run and played in. He was warm, with his own mom just feet away. I sobbed, thinking of my own mother. It wasn't the idea of her finding out too, or knowing I would never see her again. It was the guttural, instinctual, painful need for her. It was like being too far underwater and being out of breath, kicking as fast as you can, but knowing you couldn't make it. I needed her, but wouldn't make it to the surface. To her. My sobbing had given me away. That horrible metallic sound reverberated around me, and I remember I was being fed. She was feeding me to something. I had taken a deep breath, bracing myself for the pain, and made for the fence. Before my feet even hit the ground, her claws were in my neck. She flung me further from the trailer and onto the fresh cement that had been poured during the warmer months. I gave up. I'll be honest. I accepted that I was going to die. Then I had heard something unexpected and sickening. Small, furtive movements. Unmistakable vocalizations. Even just from primal grunting and wet groans. I knew I knew it was her young, and I knew it was human. I felt her toxic breath on me before I realized that she had moved. She paused for a second, mapping the wounds she had inflicted so that she could use them again as grips. That was when she dug in so deep into the opening in my shoulder that I could feel her nails and her fingers deep inside the wound. She flung me further across the cement, closer to the sickening, furtive movements. I squeezed my eyes shut. I smelled rancid organic decay and the unmistakable odor of feces. I felt small, fluttering fingers on my neck. Small, little, childlike. I made the inevitable mistake of opening my eyes. I saw dirty blonde hair, tinged with green, draped across a tiny face. Human feet. Baby feet. He was maybe 3, dirty and small. His fingernails were long and sharpened to points. He smiled, and thick mucus stretched across several blackened, sharp teeth. He was missing some, but what remained were crooked, stained and diseased, stuck in purple, rotten gums. Instead of chubby, rosy cheeks, he had hollow, sunken gray skin. The bags under his eyes were purple and veined. Instead of bright, youthful eyes, these were haunted orbs, devoid of color. Faded, milky irises deformed around dark, soulless pupils. He wore what had once been pajamas. Under layers of blood and grime, little trains chugged across his small body in a pattern. The sobs had returned from their hiding place in my chest. I had felt the need to comfort this small, broken doll of a child. That's when he lunged, his broken teeth sinking into my forearm. The pain was unbelievable, bright and loud like the headlights of a truck barreling down on you. I pulled away and heard a horrifying squelching sound as my forearm flesh ripped and hung from his tiny, plump lips. I gagged as he hungrily shoved my skin into his mouth. He ran to the monster, clinging to her body, his stubby hands sinking into her rotten fruit skin. I held my hand tightly against my forearm, watching the blood spill in tributaries between my fingers. It began to snow. Tiny, delicate laceworks fell into and melted against the steaming pool of blood at my feet. A disgusting gurgling sound brought me back, and I watched in horror as the little boy nursed from his mother's surviving breast. Thick blood spilled from the side of his mouth as she gently swept the hair from his face. Years later, I would look up the missing children's database online. I would narrow my search to my state, select the birth year, clumsily guess at the date missing, and it would take me 6 days and 2 breakdowns, but I would find him, along with an inaccurate age progression picture. His parents had named him Mason. He was a twin. He had a baby sister and a dog. He went missing from a family camping trip when he and his brother were 1. But I didn't know any of that when I watched him wash down my flesh with bloody breast milk from a demon I hadn't known existed a few hours earlier. Hours earlier, I'd been at the mall, for Christ's sake. The mall with Charles. I guess remembering my brother's body hanging limply across the steering column had jarred me into action. Knowing he wasn't even a football field away from me got me moving. If I could get over the fence, I could make a beeline for Dominic's backyard. I would just have to jump over the mostly frozen creek to get there. Then I could run to his parents' window and have them call the police. I could see the yellow square in the dark that was the sliding glass door to their kitchen from where I was. If I ran through their house as a shortcut, I could run down their driveway, straight down my street to my house. My heart broke a little as I thought of my parents and my sister beginning to worry about us, as we were only a block away fighting for our lives. But if I got to the far end of the fence before the inn climbed up, I could get to Charles and keep him safe, keep him warm and talking until the ambulance arrived. Surely somebody had called. The impact on the car was so loud. The other driver surely had a car phone or maybe a cell phone. Maybe even Yuki's Aikido puppy Moki had heard and was barking up a storm. Maybe the police were already there. For a moment, I thought about grabbing the boy, even if he bit me. I could carry him on my back and get him as far away from her as I could. Maybe even get him home to his family. But even as I stood there, I could barely hold myself up. The world had started to spin around me, blood thickly but steadily pooling on my shoes, my bra, and at the top of my jeans. A few feet from my right lay a rubble pile, not large, but mainly chunks of rebar and concrete. I'd barely made a few inches of progress towards it when her metallic screech again assaulted my senses. My hands covered my ears. I shuffled towards the pile and grabbed a chunk of the rubble, a crude, misshapen, and awkward hammer to wield against the impossible enemy. A rusted, twisted metal handle with a heavy and uneven weight of concrete, hard to hold and even harder to swing. But it was all I had, and I knew it only had to get to the weakest part of her. I only had to incapacitate her long enough to get within earshot of Dominic's house. It couldn't be much past 10 p.m. Someone would have to hear me. I gripped my shoddy weapon tightly to my chest with both hands and felt her swoop down violently as I dove for a cement tunnel, her empty-handed dive throwing her off balance. I scrambled awkwardly towards the far end of the tunnel as I heard her raspy wings pulling her upward before her second strike. Instead of waiting for her to cut me off at the tunnel, I ran as fast as I could, darting from the opening and towards the sickly sweet smell of her nest. The only thing between the fence and me was a bloody baby boy. Blood swirled in my mouth, and a gritty, sharp feeling forced me to spit. I don't know why the image of my tooth and my hand covered in blood triggered a response in me, but it did. I knew I was dying, not just that I was going to die, that this monster my parents had never imagined in their worst nightmares would take their daughter away forever, and they would never see my body or have anything to bury, but that I currently was actively dying. The damage to my ribs, my lungs, my spleen, my arm would kill me if the blood loss or hypothermia didn't do it first. I knew I was dying, and it turned me into a monster too. I ran, not straight for the fence, but for her nest. I could hear her above me, barreling down. I ran right towards that little boy and swung a 20-pound chunk of concrete down on his tiny hand, smashing it to the ground. The sound he made wakes me up at night sometimes. His screams were animal-like, and dropped my weapon to cover my ears. The rusted metal scream from the sky crashed down like a bomb, and I ran. I didn't look back. I ran to the fence. With all the strength I had left, I pulled myself up, shoving my foot into a diamond-shaped hole made by the chain link. I'd hopped 1,000 fences this way in my life, and to this day I'm grateful I had the experience. My bleeding hands found the frozen horizontal pipe at the top of the fence, and groaned in pain as I hefted myself over. All the fence-hopping experience in the world wouldn't have made climbing with shattered ribs and bleeding flanks any less impossible, and I could only crash to the ground. Both ankles jarred into the frozen ground, and my scream stuck in my throat, caught on blood and bile, escaping only as a choking sob. Her violent, crazed screams were still on the ground as she tended to her baby. I didn't let guilt slow me down. I ran as fast as I could for maybe 6 feet before my ankles gave out. Dominic's house was all I could see, a tunnel of black closing in on my vision. I never looked back. I gripped my fingers into the frosty ground, pulling myself up. I hobbled, sprinting towards the dark field. The night sky above me swirled with snow flurries. My busted, bloody fingers fumbled at my jacket zipper. I could see the flickering blue glow of the late-night TV coming from Mr. and Mrs. Rossi's bedroom. The tunnel grew smaller, and I could see less and less. Bawling, I forced my arms out of the jacket as I reached the banks of the creek. Dominic and I had spent summers of our childhood testing the width of the creek along its entirety, and I knew that the bend behind his house was not jumpable. My toes slipped over the crest of the land, and a razor-sharp talon slashed at my hands. I screamed and screamed and swung my jacket into the writhing storm of limbs and wings above me. Feeling solid impact on one of the swings, I let go of the jacket and flung myself across the frozen creek, landing with about a foot left, my feet crushing through the glass-thin ice as my ankles crumbled beneath me. I could only see a pinhole in front of me, a flickering blue of TV light. I could hear her above me, diving down, finally, for the kill. Her metallic scream and the deafening boom of Mr. Rossi's handgun, the one I'd never even known he had. He was standing on the back porch, one hand over his head, gun pointed to the sky. Mrs. Rossi stood next to me, Dominic's baseball hat in her hand. The last thing I saw was the golden warm glow of the Rossi's kitchen, and the pinhole closing as the world darkened around me. I've read the statement Mr. and Mrs. Rossi gave the police, that they heard what they thought were animal noises behind the house, but when they opened the back door, they heard human screams as well. They saw a large, dark shape in the night, but only a second later they saw my body slumped over, my fingers barely making it to their property. They had called 911, and then my parents. The ambulance had brought my brother and the other driver to the hospital, and it only arrived 30 minutes before mine did. My dad had run to the Rossi's house while my poor, confused, frantic mother rode to the hospital with Cammy and our neighbor. When my dad and I recently recalled the events of that night, I cried hearing the usual funny, goofy man choke up, remembering seeing me slumped over Mrs. Rossi like a rag doll, her white robe covered in my blood. He said that my face was so bruised and swollen that he thought an animal had mauled me. He wasn't exactly wrong. Mr. Rossi had stood guard with the bat until the police and EMTs arrived. Animal control didn't press me too hard. In fact, the vaguer and foggier my memory was, the happier they seemed. I knew that if I told the truth, I'd be locked up, medicated, or assumed to be a victim of something else. A monster woman from the sky. Before I could have even said it out loud, I knew better and feigned memory loss. To this day, the official story is 2 cars on Pondside were struck by a wild animal, and the passenger of one of the cars was attacked and dragged by the animal until a neighbor heard the commotion and fired a gun, scaring it off. While I was in the hospital, a handful of flowers, candles, and teddy bears were left at the stop sign. Charlie doesn't remember anything. He says the last thing he can recall is running to the car in the parking lot and turning the heat on, before pulling the car around for me. I'm actually happy this is the last thing that he remembers. I wonder if he's telling the truth, though. Cammy would come in my room at night for years. She would sit on the floor next to my bed with her fuzzy Disney blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She knew the whole story from beginning to end, even about Mason, a detail I had kept from my parents. Cam and I would stay up together until the sun came up, our eyes locked on the windows in my room, the one facing the south. Some nights, she would get in bed with me, both of us sitting with our backs against the wall, our shoulders resting on one another's, both of us looking at the window, scanning every inch of the blue-gray pitch until morning's first light, searching for a growing speck of black. My parents, proud pacifists, had purchased a gun each, and a few years later they had Cammy and I in judo classes. But the best thing they did was believe me. Even that first night, after the first surgery, they had listened intently, never interrupting or telling me I was imagining things or lying. However, it was made very clear that while our home was a safe space, we weren't to talk about it outside the walls. I know she's still out there. I know Mason is too. Even after I moved away, my mom would send newspaper articles, first clippings in the mail, then eventually links in text messages as time went on. Police blotters about animal attacks, missing dogs, unexplained accidents, missing blonde boys. She took one every few years from different areas, and I thought initially maybe she had killed or eaten Mason once he was too old, until I saw them both one night. I'd heard the whistle, and I didn't even need to look up, but I did. But that's a story for another time. Looking back on all these great stories really makes me realize how many friends this channel has. many of whom are listening right now, and how many great stories we run across that we can give a voice to here on this channel. I really love it, and I love all of you too. Let's keep right on rolling with another story by OK Imagination 3794 and their tale about a crow dropping a bleeding statue on my house. It's been a couple of months since this phenomenon occurred. I also feel like I've bottled up too many emotions, as nobody would believe me, at least until I found you guys. So, here goes the story of the incident where I met this entity. One day, I went out to the balcony to sweep, as I usually do. I finished my work and took an afternoon siesta. After I woke up, I found a bronze statue, heavily oxidized, in a puddle of blood. I guess now was the time to give some context. I served in the armed forces, therefore I wasn't really afraid of blood, as I'd seen my fair share of blood and death. I picked up the statue to inspect it. It had a gash on its right wrist, and it was bleeding profusely. Now this freaked me out a little. I never expected any supernatural events to happen to me. I was always skeptical of my family's classic ghost stories. Yet, my years of physical and psychological training kicked in. Statue was about 12 inches tall, featured a woman wearing a robe and holding a paper fan, staring at a noose in front of her. I took the statue and put it in the sink. My analytical mind kicked in. I collected some of the blood for further analysis. I cleaned up the puddle and the trail of blood. Last thing I want is to be landed as a murderer by the Karen next door. I then took a bath and had a change of clothes. I also wondered how the statue had gotten there. Naturally, I checked the CCTV footage. What I saw shook me to my core. I got goosebumps and sweaty hands just looking at the footage. A crow, jet black in color, with red glowing eyes, swooped in from seemingly nowhere, dropped the statue, and flew away. It easily seemed to be able to carry the moderately heavy thing. Its movements were smooth, like a knife through butter. Its eyes, though, those eyes were glowing red. They sent shivers down my spine. They seemed to dissect me and draw me into an inescapable void. They betrayed an air of superior intelligence, yet seemed to be pleading in a way, pleading to help and take it seriously, like a trapped soul. I had to get it out of my head. I took a deep breath and decided that the next best course of action would be to call an archaeologist, or at least an art curator. I decided to check my contact list. I couldn't find an archaeologist, but I did miraculously find an art curator, a former friend of mine at university. I called her and asked her to come to my house immediately. She lived about 2 hours away. I promised her I'd make it worth her time. She told me she'd arrive the next day, it already being late. I decided to take dinner and fall asleep. I woke up to a pecking and cawing in the middle of the night. It appeared Mr. Crow had come to remind me to take this seriously. Well, that's exactly what I was doing, though for my sake, not for its. Yet, it didn't try to enter the house or hurt me or anything. This event seemed to give me purpose in life. The endless days of drinking alone at home, sleeping during the day, drinking again, not to mention the numerous suicide attempts, had taken a toll on my body. I lived to die. I had no one, no lovers, no family, scarce few friends. The next day at about 11, I could hear the honk of Stephanie's car. She was wearing a designer dress and bag, and here I was in my sweatpants. I took her to the kitchen. I think she was expecting to see art or valuable artifacts, not a horrific old statue. She gasped and almost fainted at the stream of blood in the sink. I put her on the couch and asked her to take a deep breath. I plucked some chamomile and crushed them. I find that the smell of chamomile calms me down, and it seemed to allay some of her fears. I asked her if she had a solution to my problem. Still in shock, she replied with a hushed voice, "No." She promised not to tell a soul and promptly left, not even asking for the fee. I guess regular people are afraid of blood to an extent, and it appears that the alcohol numbs my nerves as well. The only remaining answer was to take the blood to a forensic analyst, hoping that it was human and that they could recognize the DNA. I called one of my acquaintances from the Army, who now works as an analyst. He asked me to meet him at 4 in the evening. I said that sounded fine. The next week breezed by. That is, until the day I got the results. The blood was that of Miss Mizoom, who was found murdered at her home 2 years back. The killer was never found. I had to bribe my friend to keep his mouth shut so I didn't end up in a police interrogation room. I assessed the public records relating to her case. Her body was found in a state of advanced decomposition, despite being killed only a day prior. She had acid burns and bite marks all over her body. Her house, and especially the attic, was completely trashed. I took a cursory review of her family history. Her elder sister was found dead in her room 2 years later, 4 months back. She'd committed suicide by slashing her wrist. What's more, she was found with the statue in her room. Though, why was the younger sister's blood flowing from the statue when the older was found with it? It seemed that the deaths were connected somehow. The older sister's death seemed natural as suicide could be, and that's why I'm in front of her uncle's house, uninvited, like a burglar. I'm glad he didn't just shoot me on sight. Her uncle was an old man in his 60s. He didn't seem too happy, but he politely invited me in. He gestured for me to have a seat on the sofa and got me a cup of matcha. I introduced myself as an art curator who came into possession of a bronze statue. He almost spat at me in disgust. "So you make your living selling dead people's artifacts?" I shrunk back, but calmly, as I replied, "No, I came into possession of it through an agent. I didn't know it belonged to a deceased person till today." I continued, "I wanted to pay my respects. I was sorry for your loss." He seemed a bit more pleased and replied, "Her grave is in the Shinto shrine." I nodded my head in acceptance. I asked, "If it's okay to share, may I know why she did such a thing?" He was taken aback. He replied, "Thank you for your concern. Not even her own family demonstrated that. Kiyomori was quite attached to her younger sister. Actually, now that I think about it, she probably had an unhealthy obsession with her sister. She paid for her college tuition, funded her hobbies, advised her, and followed her everywhere, if possible, despite being a responsible adult. The only obsession she had other than her sister was the statue you talked about. The statue was that of my aunt, Kia, Mori's grandmother. She chose to end her life the same way, just like Kiyomori did." Why did she commit suicide?" I asked. "You are obviously a curious person. I'll humor you. My aunt was forcibly married to a corrupt administrator. When she threatened to demask him, he turned public opinion against her and managed to get her arrested for adultery. She was sentenced to be hanged, but cut herself a day before. Her only choice was the noose or the blade. The statue was a commemoration of her honesty." I thanked him and walked to the front door, absent-minded, trying to fit the pieces of the puzzle together. As I walked out, I sensed a tingling on the back of my spine. I turned my back to see a pair of glowing yellow eyes staring back at me. It suddenly skittered away, with its body not to be seen. I'm not proud of what I did next. I ran through the street as fast as I could and reached home in record time. I opened a can of beer and turned on the TV. I doubted the soundness of my mind, and I thought my eyes were maybe playing tricks on me. Yet it had to be true. After all, I was sober back then, and my eyesight did save me back in Afghanistan. Also, in no way am I going to get killed like another horror movie protagonist. I don't think I'll knock on doors or investigate directly. I loaded my concealed Remington and disabled the safety. I'm going to sleep with it every day. The weather outside may be frightful, but there's always plenty of warmly delicious stories here for you to sink your teeth into. So let's go on to another great tale from this channel. This next one is by Daniel Lowrick, and it's a story about how a little girl tried to kill a group of people, and it might have been the best thing that ever happened to them. The cigarette smoke chokes me, but I don't let myself cough. Instead, I keep it inside. Everything in me wants to let it out, expel it like some kind of poison disagrees with my organs. Still, I keep it inside. It's my first cigarette ever, in a classroom far away from the populated part of the school. I won't let myself look like a wimp, not in front of her. I couldn't give a crap about the popular kids standing with us in the room. I've never felt the need to care about them. However, when I heard the girl of my dreams was going with them, I just had to be there. That's pretty much how I found myself here. No one goes here anymore. Not after that kid died. Honestly, it was kinda sad. Some poor little girl gets lost and ventures into a neglected and dangerous part of the school on her own, on her very first day at that, and has a large table fall on her and injure her pretty badly. Then, slowly, she loses her life as she bleeds out. You'd expect there to be an outcry of some sort, yet the school pushes the blame onto the parents and bashes them. The local paper joins in, and before you know it, the whole town is bullying this family about not teaching their child proper safety rules. A 7-year-old girl was supposed to be taught proper safety rules. It sounds as ridiculous as it actually is. What do we get from all this? We get lectures on how we, as students, should keep the younger students safe. We get ghost stories that quickly spread across the school about the young girl and how she can still be heard crying. We get a special assembly today on the 1-year anniversary of her death, an assembly where we have a moment of silence for her. But don't worry, guys, refreshments are provided. Seems like everyone around here is an insensitive bastard. I pause my thought to find Alicia looking at me. I take another deep pull off the cigarette I'm holding. I take it better this time. I still feel the need to cough, but not as intense as before. Is this what romance is worth? Because as my brain gets cloudy and I drown in nicotine, it seems worth it. That is when the crying starts. I almost didn't hear it at first. It was soft, but definitely audible. I turn around, but there's nothing. We all start looking around. Have we been caught? None of our teachers would make that soft a sound if they caught us. Must be a small animal. Then it dawns on us all at once, and a nervous chuckle takes over the room. It can't be the stories about the dead girl. It just can't. It's probably just someone playing a prank on us. Still, the whole group slowly but surely creeps towards the door. No one admitting they're scared, but everyone ready to run at the same time. I take another pull off the cigarette, then I hear another cry. It's time for us to go. However, a thud behind us makes us turn around, and then a slam behind us makes us turn around again. Something distracts us, something in the dark of the room, just long enough for us to turn away from the door, long enough for it to slam shut. We're all trapped now. Everyone's scrambling, trying to open the door. The cool kids are still nervously chuckling, thinking it must just be the wind. However, the wind can't close a door hard enough for it to feel like it's been welded to the door frame. We can't get out of the room. That's becoming clearer now. You see, the thing about the light and the dark is that you can see in either one. The other just has to be absent. As the door blocks out the light from outside, the room inside becomes clearer. The dark corner is now taking shape. There's a desk there, a large, heavy one, and underneath it is a small frame. It looks like a doll, but it's faintly moving. It has to be a child. I'm not an idiot, not by any means. I'm a skeptic, definitely, but not an idiot. I'm seeing a ghost live out its last moments. A child live out her last moments. The cigarette is on the floor now, and so am I. We've all fallen to the floor, unable to move. I look around me, and it seems like we've been pinned by an invisible force. It sounds ridiculous, but it makes sense. A force more powerful than our meek bodies can handle. She's not living her last moments. We're living her last moments. I feel like I'm about to die. I'm not ready for this. I'm too young. I just want to go home to see my family. I just want to go back to class. I was so excited to see my friends today, to be around people who I care about. All things that she must have thought about. All things I'm thinking about now. I turn my head, and she's in the corner, sobbing, a child with nowhere to go, and no one to help her. Yet she keeps asking for help. I can't die here. I hope she gets help. I hope I get help. That's when I realize she never got help, and maybe neither will I. We're all going to die here, and I'm terrified by that thought. But I'm not the one I should be afraid for. My life, as scared as I am, doesn't matter. I should be helping the one that looks at me and sees me as someone older, someone who could have helped her. I turn to her and look in her eyes, into the eyes of the dying child, and speak to her. It's going to be okay, I say to her. It's all I can say with the weight on my chest. It's all I need to say. She stops sobbing and looks at me, almost as if she trusts me. I wish I could help, but I can't. The weight is now off my chest. Every one of us is able to get up. Every one of us is able to leave. And so is she. She disappears. I hope that it knows that wherever it's going to be okay. Outside the school, emergency services are waiting. Apparently, the same thing happened to every single person in school. They didn't see the ghost, but they did feel pinned down. Authorities are blaming it on a gas leak from years of neglect by the people in charge. When I hear that, I start to chuckle. I wonder who they're going to pin the blame on this time. We've reached that midway point, but don't be too sad. There will be more great stories before we say goodbye. This next story is by Nicholas Leonard, who is a new friend of the channel, but a pretty good friend, if I do say so myself. He brings us a lot of great stories, and this is just one of them. It's called A Revelation of Space and Time Disdained, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. I think I heard it this afternoon. I always knew I'd hear it completely someday. I always had an inclination, a suspicion, but I was wrought with the skepticism of modern life, a skepticism that rewards those who follow it for decades. Yeah, I think I heard it. I can't forget it. I know what it was, and I fear next time it won't subside the way it did this afternoon. I parked on the side of the street because my wife's van was in the driveway. Like always, I slammed my car door loud enough to tease the kids. Daddy's home. I crossed the sidewalk and stopped at our mailbox, which was staked along the white picket fence perimetering the front lawn, mowed just the other day, might I add, and examined the mess of bills and adverts that had been slipped into the box. I flipped through the envelopes, pushing open the white picket gate with my hip and inching onto the pathway into the front yard. But I caught a whiff of whatever my wife was cooking inside and decided that whatever we had gotten in the mail could wait. It smelled greasy, crispening in the August air. After lifting my face from the mail to smell that aroma that welcomed me home, I caught a glance at the red plastic bucket and the 2 yellow plastic shovels in the driveway beside the van. I opened up the front door and walked into the foyer, almost tripping over a stuffed armadillo, but the smell of dinner and the bang of my children eroded any scolding that I could have done. My boys bounced over to see me before I could even close the door behind me. They latched onto me in a hug. "Hey, guys," I chuckled. My wife appeared across the hall in the entrance to the kitchen, wearing a lime green t-shirt and a baby blue cooking apron over it. Her most prominent features being her hands on her hips, something she'd become a master of over the years since the birth of our children. She stood so, in a steadfast way like a superhero. "Hi, honey," I greeted her, my dying chuckle ending in the normal tone for her. She just gave me a smile and looked down at our boys, who were still clinging to me. "How was the beach, guys?" I looked down at the 2 of them. "Good," Thomas bounced. "Mom wanted us to build a sandcastle, but we dug a hole instead," William confessed proudly. I gave my wife, Lexi, a half-cocked smile. Our understanding of their cute but comic disobedience stretched across the hall. "It was the biggest hole in the world," Thomas said, bouncing up again. "Bigger than the Grand Canyon?" I asked. There was no pause or hesitation in my boys. They jumped together, going, "Yes, yes!" "Now, just how much of the beach did you guys bring home?" I asked, looking around the foyer until my wife spoke from down the hall. "I hosed them down when we got home." I looked down at our boys. They smiled up at me, apparently unaware of just how much they still smelled like sunscreen. "Come on, kids, let your dad come in," Lexi said, waving them away. They obeyed, the backs of their head bouncing with hair as they ran to her. I wiped my shoes on the welcome mat and walked into the hall, went upstairs into my wife and I's bedroom, and put down the mail on our bureau, undid my tie, and left it on the bed. I came back downstairs to meet my wife in the kitchen. I usually put away my ties, but the smell of dinner was just too enticing. "How was the office?" Lexi asked after I kissed her on the cheek. "How's the turkey coming? God, I could smell it almost as much as all that beach you 2 dragged home," I gruffed, ruffling each of the kids' heads. They were already sitting at the kitchen table. Lexi pirouetted and caught herself against the counter, propping her hand against it behind her back as she blew her hair out of her face. "It's so hot in here with the oven. Can we turn on the AC?" she asked. I couldn't say no to her, and it was humid after all. "Of course. Kids, go shut the windows and turn on the AC." They bounced out of their chairs and hurried off, the squeak of the windows being shut erupting throughout the house as they raced each other. I noticed that there were 2 pots bubbling on the stove, broccoli and potatoes. "I'm just in time to mash the potatoes," I said, in my way of offering to help, relieving my wife a little bit, even though she wouldn't show it. I strained the potatoes, put them back into the pot, and started mashing them after sprinkling garlic powder and Parmesan cheese over them. In the nick of time, we realized she forgot the gravy, and as the steam from the potatoes settled in my face, I hurried downstairs into the basement to retrieve a can of mushroom gravy. "Go on, sit down," my wife swatted me away from the stove. I obeyed her and plopped down in my designated chair and scooted it in. "Do you want a drink, honey?" she asked, as she swarmed across the kitchen table to set out milk for the kids. "No, I'm good," I shook my head, about to pick up my knife and fork before the turkey was even on the table. Adjusting in my chair, I caught a glimpse of each of my sons' smiles. Their passing smiles stuck out in my memory because it was the last normal thing I saw before it happened. How clumsily I must have smirked back. I wondered if I turned my head too suddenly. I wondered if this all came about because I twisted my head incorrectly. And that's what caused it. That's what pulled the muscle of space and time that evening. This is wishful thinking, of course. I saw my wife bending down, 2 puffy oven mitts on her hands, as she pulled out the big tin-foil tray with the bronze-crusted turkey in it. It happened just as she went to spin around to face the table. A loud gong sounded like a giant bell tower, letting out one large chime, erupted in my ears. Turning, turkey in hand, my wife was turning slower than usual, while the gong echoed lower and lower in my head. My sons were smiling up at her, fidgeting in their seats, but slowly fidgeting, just as my family almost returned to normal speed. An identical gong erupted in my head, and they all slowed down again, this time while Lexi was lowering down the turkey to the table. I was too confused to say anything about it. Evidently, it didn't affect them, or they weren't aware of it, because my son still smiled, and my wife had a look that said all was well in the universe. She swept her cooking apron out of the way when she went to sit down at the sound of the 3rd giant chime. It gave me a massive headache, but I couldn't cringe. I wondered fleetingly if this was a stroke or something, but part of me knew what it was. I can't imagine what expression I had in the echoes of that phantom gong, that phantom grandfather clock warning. Time must have moved normally for my family, but for the duration of that echoing, my face must have contorted into a display of absolute defeat. There was something final in that gong, the chime, the ringing, whatever it was. It reverberated in my entire body, leaving an ache all over my heart, squeezing my heart to the point of pumping fear into my eyes. But time repaired itself as the echo fizzled down into a low dinging, and whatever tears had appeared in my eye ducts had receded. Time restored itself, and instead of terror, my face must have just displayed a simple seriousness, an eagerness to eat. My wife had started cutting the turkey when I came to. My sons nor my wife had noticed what came over me, how fast everything seemed to move when time was normal again, when the kitchen unwrapped itself with a snap as if air bubbles of reality were popping, and this reality was its puddle. We ate dinner. I asked furthermore about their day at the beach, jokingly asking if they saw any sharks, and pretending like I hadn't just experienced an existential aneurysm. I pretended like I had an appetite, standing up to pick through the dark meat while each of our boys got each of the turkey legs, although the legs were a little too big for them. What lingering worry I had that the sound would return was assuaged then, and when I sat back down with my second helping of meat, I began telling myself that it was just some sort of bizarre headache. While helping my wife do the dishes, scrubbing a plate, and getting lost in the ballad of the sponge, I wondered if I had suffered some strange bout of heat stroke. It was a hot day after all, and hot inside the kitchen because of the oven. We sat down in the living room where one of the air conditioners was humming like a guard who'd started humming while standing watch. It was 7, and time for Wheel of Fortune. Lexi had scooped the boys bowls of pistachio ice cream. Maybe a mature flavor for their age, but they liked it, and liked it especially because of the chocolate chips she sprinkled on it. I had plain old vanilla, though. My wife is a genius, but she kept her mouth shut to let the boys have time enough to solve the puzzles. I could see the smart-ass look in her eyes as she cleaned her spoon of ice cream, as if keeping it there in her mouth would keep her from blurting out the answer. And when the Wheel of Fortune ended, the long progress of convincing the boys to go to bed began, chasing them around to try to get them to brush their teeth. The gong, as if from out of a cut in the cosmos, that chime came again, as if accidentally finding its way into my mind. I froze in the upstairs hallway as Thomas ran away laughing, slower and slower, the bounce of his steps becoming emphasized, the slower that time became, and the echoes of that phantom chime. William scooted by me, his distorted laughter like a kite in his wake. Lexi scooted by me next, even slower. Her giggles slowed as it became absorbed by the phantom chimes, by the slow, drawn-out chimes. I stayed there in the hallway, my fingers twitching at my hip at a normal speed, but I watched my family recede slower and slower down the hall that now seemed to elongate. The hallway was stretching. The thunderous chimes were rolling out of my house. All the AC humming and laughing became completely absorbed in the echo of the phantom chime. My spine was a foreboding grandfather clock that crashed its bells against my heart. My wife and children disappeared into our bedroom, and I stayed standing in the hallway, watching the hallway stretch and stretch, but my height remained the same. But when the echoes were whining out and losing their reach, the hallway began to warp back to normalcy. But now this may have been my heartbeat trying to snap me out of whatever this was, just as the hallway was snapping back to me. There was a ticking, an old-fashioned ticking, a steady swinging pendulum like an old grandfather clock, in the absence of a cosmic chime, of the phantom chime, the gong, whatever it was. The ticking became domineering. The ticking was prominent. The ticking refused to let me move. I had to stay there and listen to that maddening ticking. Surely, even though time was restored, my face was stuck in an expression of astonishment, and I dreaded that my family would run out of the bedroom and see me frozen in the hallway, not blinking, not moving, just standing there with a 1,000-yard stare. That's what I had. It must have made my eyes crystallize with the dryness that comes from not blinking, my almost teary eyes begging for it to stop. I blinked. Thomas and William came rushing out with Lexi on their tail, smiling and leaning down to catch them. But like always, she let them get away and continued to chase and tire them out. My spirit stuttered. I limped around to join the chase. I jogged, even though I felt woozy. Eventually, the boys were in their bed. I stood in the doorway, watching Lexi tuck them in, and their nightlight cast shadows on the wall. They definitely were tired, all right. They clutched the hems of their sheets and looked up at her like baby birds in their nest. "Good night, boys," I spoke. "I love you." "Love you too, Daddy," Thomas said. William must have been too tired to say it back. His eyelids were fluttering. Lexi walked to me, and we walked back downstairs to watch TV. She fell asleep before me, which it's usually me first, but that night I couldn't sleep. I laid on my back, arms over my chest, looking up at the ceiling and waiting to hear the chime again, to hear the ticking inside me spring up again. How could I fall asleep beside her? I was too guilty. I knew why this was happening. Couldn't even bring myself to look her in the face in the dark, my consciousness clinging on to the constant hum of the air conditioner. I knew why this was happening. Yes, I knew why, but I'm too good of a man to agree to it. I am this way for my wife and kids because I love them. I never thought I'd fall in love. I never thought I'd have made 2 wonderful sons, but I love them just the same. I swear I wouldn't change a thing about my life, but I know why this is happening. It's a warning. The plain old job I wasn't meant for. It's a good paying job, yes. Benefits included, yes. It pays the bills and gives my family a good life, but it's not what I was meant to do with my life. It's not what outer space had in mind for me. The ticking. There it is again. I wonder if something is angry with me, disappointed in me. I let something greater than myself down. I'm not letting my family down. No. That's why I have to work tomorrow. But I know why I'll be haunted by this incessant ticking at the office. As I lay here, I feel the nebulous gases of another dimension slowly reaching in to grab me before I could complete my destiny. What my original destiny was, I don't know. I made my own destiny, and yes, it feeds my family, but why is this thing, this ticking, this chime angry with me? A disappointed original destiny. Is that what's pushing me or warning me? It feels like something is coming for me, or my current modern-day destiny is solidifying, and I'm out of time to change it now. I gulped. The people I love, the woman beside me that I love, the children that are part of me, are strangers to this original destiny. To this destiny I was forced not to choose. One more story for you before it's time for so long. And this one is by Ambitious Gas, who is an old friend of the channel and responsible for a lot of stories that you love a lot, like the Covenant series, just to name one. So, let's hear a classic about the voice from the vents. I remember when playing behind my house was an endless exploration of imaginative adventures that could only further inspire my 8-year-old mind. Many times I was a barbarian warrior, like Conan, lopping off hands with my enchanted tree branch. The evil beasts conjured up in my mind stood no chance against my strength and wit, my lust for action and romantic adventure. However, I now realize just how close my world was to intertwining with the Sumerian, his fiction. For many years, the tales of sword and sorcery described monsters of unfathomable terror. Oh, such only brute force and unwavering mind of a fearless warrior could encounter and hope to defeat them. I was not this warrior, yet my discovery of a hidden terror seemed to be destined for me to find. For when I wandered off the set path which led from mine to my grandparents' house, I stumbled across a shaded patch of forest with a small, murky pond at its center. The area was dead quiet, save for the crunching of dead leaves beneath my feet and the occasional nerve-wracking pop of breaking twigs. I remember a slight fog over the water, more like a vapor dissipating, as if the pond was boiling. Yet, being an ignorant youth, I reached down and touched the surface and felt it was very cold. So much so that I drew my hand back in surprise, only to begin violently wiping my fingers on my clothes, for the liquid was like some sort of sticky alcohol. With the commotion I made, I heard across the water a soft rustling that seemed to be heading around the pond in my direction, but I stopped once I glanced towards it. For all my fear of the sound, my eyes suddenly came across a shape in the center of the pond. It was like a pale, smooth limestone, yet from it came a small, delicate trail of bubbles, escaping from an unseen pocket of air. Stupidly, I started to lean forward, squinting for a better look. I fell, my body submerging in the cold burning of the foggy liquid. I desperately tried to place my feet on whatever ground I could find, but there was none. I kicked and thrashed towards the surface, not wanting to open my eyes for fear of the liquid blinding me. Suddenly, I felt one of my feet strike something hard. The limestone, maybe? But in response, there came a sound, a low grunt of some kind. The pond began to build up a slight current, and, as if returning the favor, a sharp pain hit my thigh. I screamed into the mysterious water and put all of my effort into reaching the shore of what now seemed to be an infinite ocean. I was no longer Conan as I breached the surface. I was a child crying out for his parents, smothering from the fumes of this potentially poisonous body of a creature-infested water. I climbed out after what seemed an eternity of an unwaking nightmare, and refused to look back as I ran from the pond. I expected to hear the sound of a monster breaching the pond's surface, but the silence of the dark woods remained unbroken. The vapors of the dry liquid trailed behind me as I desperately made for the familiar path. When it was in sight, I felt the calmness of familiarity, which caused me to slow my pace. The world was luminous with the summer evening, and the creatures of common knowledge went about their business, ignorant of what I had found. When I reached home, I wondered if I had only dreamed up another fantastic story in which I'd encountered the pond. There was no scent of the strange water, no more burning on my skin, but the fear in my heart returned as I looked down at my torn jeans and spied a coagulation of blood from a long scratch on my flesh. I hurried inside and tossed my clothes into the hamper, showering for good measure, unintentionally earning praise from my mother for being on top of my hygiene. I told my parents nothing about the pond or the scratch, but I couldn't completely hide my fearful glances to the window facing the edge of the forest during dinner. The question didn't come. All was normal within our house, which made me more and more at ease, as well as conscious of my illogical perception. The evening went on with my dad and I watching reruns of Star Trek, while my mom read one of her awful Amish-based novels in the lamplight. I look back on this time to comfort myself, given what was to follow. I was tucked into bed by my loving parents. Being an only child at the time, I was coddled quite a bit. The bedroom was alight with glow and dark stars, posters of Star Wars, shelves of action figures ready to defend me while I slumbered. The light of my aquarium and the shadow of the angelfish gliding on the wall eased me into a near doze, until the bubbles from the pump caused me to open my eyes in fear. Suddenly, as if responding to my fearful pondering, I heard a scratching in the vent near the right side of my bed. A soft clinking followed by breathing, as if something small was making a great effort to get through the grate. I was terrified. My hopes that my imagination from my playful excursions of the day had overtaken my senses were dashed. Yet the delusion refused to let loose its prisoner, which was my sanity. I knew I had to face it to prove its non-existence, so that logic could once again have dominion. "Hello?" I asked of the darkness. Immediately, the noise ceased, and in my mind's eye, I could see a rat scurrying away in fear of its discovery. But it was my contribution to this fable that was dismissed instead. "You found it, boy," came the whisper of a tiny creature behind the grate. My eyes welled with tears at the sound. I was about to call out to my parents when it continued. "All this time I tried to keep it hidden from the short nose, and a runt such as yourself seems compelled to find it and wake it up." The voice was irritated, yet it also contained fear in its reverence. "What was it?" I asked, in a trembling voice. My aquarium bubbled quietly, reminding me of the pale shape in the pond. "It is a manticore, one that has hibernated for many human lifetimes, but has ended far more. I was entrusted to watch over it by the one who placed it in the prison. You stirred it. Now it will soon awaken." As I rose up in bed, I forgot my fear of disturbing circumstances and speaking with hidden things. I knew what a manticore was. I knew it well enough to have it far from my mind to dream up during my woodland adventures, for the image of the creature caused real fear in me, though in a hypothetical sense. The image I had seen in books of monsters went through my brain and disturbed me anew. Now I realized that I had been scratched by the thing's relentless claws. Had I opened my eyes while submerged in the pond, I knew that I would have gone mad to see the shape within the burning fog. "What can I do?" I asked. It didn't respond, yet I could still hear it breathing in the vent. "Please, I didn't mean to wake it up," I whimpered. I was trembling beneath the bed sheets, which used to make me feel safe. Now I only felt cold and alone, guilty for bringing such a thing into this world. You cannot put it back to sleep. It's been too long now, and it'll be hungry. You cannot hurt it with any weapon, for its flesh is invulnerable. It can eat you whole, and it'll leave no bones behind. Its roar is terrible, boy. Your mother, your father, will wake up to the sound of it, and will be taken by madness once it enters your home. It will devour your neighbors, all who dwell nearby, and no one will know what's happened to any of you. I fell out of my bed and onto the floor, sobbing. I crawled to the vent and put my face down to it, without fear of what might happen. What can I do? I implored. How can I kill it? In the grate, I could see a tiny shape stirring within, 2 glimmers of silver light peering at me, and I could see the green flesh of a long, pointed nose. It was a goblin, small and mischievous looking, though at the moment the eyes looked sad and pitying. When it spoke for the final time, I sensed the want of a brighter circumstance. If you wish to truly be the hero you pretend to be, you must slay it through its mouth. The eyes disappeared, and a soft, scrabbling shape faded into the darkness. I was alone with this frightening knowledge, and I had to make a choice. Should I return to my bed and risk waking up to the roar of the manticore, or did I face it that very night in the strange waters that it lay beneath? I was a child. I was scared, but I knew I couldn't let my family and my neighbors be devoured because of what I had done. I dressed, grabbed a flashlight and a small family picture propped up on the table next to my bed, then quietly went to the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife from the rack. With my weapon in hand, I went out the back door to the swaying trees of a windy midnight. I started up the path with an empty mind, neither allowing terrible imagery nor doubting logic to hinder my strides. I wasn't brave, but I wasn't foolish. I simply was. The reality, or at least my perception of it, had been shattered into shapeless pieces of mirror that, no matter how well formed, could never show my reflection in its former naivete. I prayed that I wouldn't find the pond, but I knew for sure that I would. The shape would be there. I would have to go back into the water and somehow open the mouth of the manticore and shove my feeble knife into it. This was my plight. I was 8 years old, on an adventure in my favorite place to pretend, and I could feel a laughing mockery of my innocence when I left the path once more. There was no sound but the wind and the trees. A crescent moon and a star-filled sky watched me from afar. I held my family picture to my chest and watched the hills of dead leaves. The beam of my flashlight shone through the trees, who almost seemed lonely in this path. In true, this was a world left behind a long, long time ago, when fairies took flight, and in the gardens of elves, dryads danced for satyrs piping tunes. Whatever creatures flourished in this pocket of time so close to my home were long since devoured by the manticore. Likely whatever force imprisoned the beast also sent it here to our plane, as well as having the courtesy of leaving a goblin behind to watch over it, no doubt. I finally saw the pond reflecting its murky grayness with my flashlight, and my soul cried out within me as a cold fear enveloped my body. There were no more vapors floating on the surface. Neither was there a pale shape below. It was still and empty. The thoughts now began to race, both logical and fantastical. It was gone. It was never there. I can return to my warm bed and forget about it. It will be there waiting for me in the midst of my parents' innards. I wanted to scream for all the emotions, but it was the manticore that screamed into the night, sending a terrible jolt through my body. My bowels cramped at the sight of the giant face of a human hovering 10 feet in the air. The paws of an enormous lion's body thudded to the ground, the wings on its back flapping a gust that almost made me topple over. The barbed, porcupine-like tail flicked violently left to right, taking out a tree with one careless swipe. The eyes were large and bulging, yellow with black gashes for feline pupils. When my eyes met that of the monster's, it screamed again in satisfaction at its discovery of its first meal after so long its slumber. I could see its 3 rows of teeth as it howled at me, and yet, somehow my only thought was, My parents are hearing this, and they're going to find out that I'm out of bed. They're going to look for me. They won't find me. I've been swallowed whole. When the manticore reached out to me, it stopped and gazed down at my tiny form and did something that finally snapped me out of my insane stupor. It grinned. The monster was grinning at my fear. The teeth were sharp and yellow. The stench of its breath broke through each of them and made me almost vomit. Stagnation of time, the willingness of its stomach acid to return to its labor. The manticore was ready to indulge itself. It breathed in through its nostrils, then opened its mouth and slowly came down over my head. Yet, somehow, instead of succumbing to terror, a white-hot hatred took over. I was offended at how weak it perceived me. I was irritated at how much of a bully this thing was. This freak of nature had thrown its weight around eons ago and eradicated the peaceful world in which I lived. I refused to let this happen again. Not to my family, my neighbors, and certainly not to me. I stepped on the first layer of its teeth and stabbed the knife into its tongue. It screamed and began to try to close its jaws on me, but I had already climbed further in and now sank my knife into the roof of its mouth. The beast thrashed its head, trying to sling me out, but I kept climbing further in, slicing and stabbing all the way through. I remember the barbarous man of action that I pretended to be, and I embraced it fully, burrowing deep into its throat, spitting blood from my own mouth as I climbed. By the sudden change in its equilibrium, I could tell it had fallen to the ground and was struggling against the pain. I pressed my feet against the back of its throat and shoved my knife deep into its skull. I couldn't penetrate it, so I began to cut upward as hard as I could. Its screams were deafening, but I knew that it could hear my laughter as I sliced and mangled without mercy. Suddenly, I was drowned in cold, burning water from the pond, along with fresh screaming, as it mingled with the manticore's wounds. I lost my knife in the flood, but not my footing, or the family picture in my hand. I kissed it, then smashed the glass in the frame and shoved it into the open gash as hard as I could. The monster bellowed and suddenly began to whine pitifully. The thrashing ceased, and the water flowed inside until I was completely submerged. I began to swim out of the mouth, fearful of the teeth, but desperate to get out. My eyes burned horridly, and all the vision I had darkened from the night, so I felt my way past the teeth to the surface. Through the burning, I could make out the flashlight which lay on the ground, and I swam towards it, fearing the claws of the beast seizing me and pulling me under. Suddenly there were small hands grabbing my arms and helping me out of the pond. It was the goblin, though I could barely see its shape. "You did it, boy! You did it! You slew the manticore!" I was confused. All the effort I put forth to hurt the creature still hadn't been enough to kill it. The goblin continued to bellow his claim, and I expected any moment that the thing would come back up and chomp us both. Yet the creature was silent. I could see now that it had plunged head first into the pond and drowned itself. It's really dead?" I asked. "Poisoned. The water is deadly to manticores that ingest it, which is why it was put here to sleep. But they can hold their breath for a long time. You made it drink the water to relieve the torture, and now its innards will burn away." I fell back and watched the star-filled sky. A meteor passed, and with it went my wish to always have this bravery that overcame my impossible fear. As the years progressed in my life, I found myself abandoning my imagination, my thoughts of heroism, but I always remembered the moment when I accepted my new reality at the edge of the pond.